Great. Thank you. Yeah, you may have to say okay there, Don. Perfect. Now we'll go back to the presentation. All right. Did you get it there, Don? So, Don, are we good to go there?
Yeah, all's
Okay,
good.
great. Thank you. All right. Marvelous. Okay. Well, this is exciting. Okay, so last week, let the Hawks in here. Last week, we were working with this important distinction of what is life under grace versus under the law. And you'll remember that that's been a dance that we've been working with this whole last few chapters. I've made the point that everyone lives under the law, whether it's the Judeo-Christian law, whether it's the Mosaic law, whether it's Islam, the Quran, whether it's Confucianism. I didn't say that right, but we all live under one form of the law or the other. Expectations of our own, expectations of others. You know, we live in a success-driven society, right? So we live under that expectation and that law. So um, anyway, so that's really cool. I'm going to mute Tom and Marilyn. There we go. And so um, we, according to Paul, are ruled not by law, but ruled by grace. And so when we were exploring last week, well, what's the difference? What does it look like to live under grace versus live under the law? I just want to review with you. This is what we came up with. So every day is a new day. Um, you, uh, some of you talked about how since we live under grace, we can make mistakes. We can start anew every day. Uh, the past is the past, and the future is the future, and we can live in this moment because we live under grace and not the law. Um, so there is a different motivation to serve, and that serving now comes out of love and who we are versus trying to check off a box. And there's less pressure about that. Wow, if I don't do it perfectly, oh man, and so I didn't put it on my presentation this morning, and I don't even remember if we talked about it last week, but Luther has that famous quote, uh, at least to many people, from his table talk where he talked about sinning boldly. Uh, and, he got himself in lots of trouble about that. Of course, he enjoyed that. But what he meant by that is that we don't have to cower in fear about making mistakes because we live under grace. So let's get out there and love, and we mess up, but since we live under grace, we're free. We're more free. We can be more bold. And so I think that's a really helpful thing. So many of you wonderfully, insightfully said that, when we're under the law, even our good stuff is self-centered because we're really doing it to achieve something, to make ourselves okay, or so we're more inward focused. So a little different than what I just said on this one, even the not living in fear and not being afraid of making mistakes. But when sin wins those little victories, because we're going to talk today about our old nature and we've been hearing in Romans 6 about our new nature. We're no longer slaves of sin. We're no longer, we have a new reality. In Romans 7 today, we're going to probably, if we get there, hear about that something else continues with us and clings to us. And so when sin wins its little victories, we don't have to be devastated. We go back to our baptism, we confess our sin, we receive forgiveness, and we move on. So a wonderful insight that came from you all last week is that we're empowered to be more graceful with others. If we live under grace, that's going to make us more graceful to other people. And it comes with our expectations, I guess you could say. We're going to I talked about expectations and that it's important to have expectations of ourselves and other people, but we need to hold those very gracefully and lightly, knowing that those expectations are sometimes not going to get met. And I talked last week about how, when you live under the law, you have those expectations, not only of yourself, but of others. And when they're not kept, then you're mad or you're upset, etc. So, what do we expect? I didn't say this last week, but it's coming to me now is again going back to Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, that book that he wrote before he became a Christian. He wrote some after, but he said the key to life is coming to grips with this truth: life is hard. And when you accept that, then life is good. And so that gets to that expectation thing. And so when we live under grace, we know that that's what makes us tick. That's the only way we can stand. So it just follows that we're going to be more graceful with others. And I didn't elaborate more on this last week, but a lot of people, a lot of religion, and a lot of Christianity is, even though they're under grace, live like they're under the law. You get the grace and then you just get law, 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 law. You show up on Sunday and you get told more of this and more of that. And the law will chew us up. And there's a lot of people who have gotten chewed up by the law in the church and have left. I'm after those folks because I want them to live under grace. But then that raises the question, well, what good is the law? And that's where we're going in Romans 7. One final thing that just came to me that we didn't talk about is that when you live under the law, you're suffering, and this is huge. I hope really focus in here and think about this. Our suffering, we wonder if it's punishment for not keeping the law. I can't tell you how many times I've been in the hospital with people. Maybe they've gotten a bad diagnosis, or they're going through a real serious illness, or even maybe they're approaching their own death. And that old part of us starts to talk and, well, what did I do wrong? What did I do to, cause this? Why is this happening to me? Because, the law is cause and effect. so we wonder about that. In those moments. So, when you live under the law, you're going to ask those questions. You're going to wonder that. And think about the book of Job and Job's lovely friends who come to him and say, well, Job, there must be some secret sin you've done. That's why this is all happening. That's the law. But when we live under grace, we know that Christ has taken away our sin, the punishment of our sin. He bore that on the cross. And so God isn't running around giving us cancer because we did something, or having this bad thing happen because we did something bad. We can let go of that. And certainly, I think we need to let go of that when it comes to big events, whether it be tornadoes or hurricanes or floods or whatever. I know that God worked in some of those ways in the Old Testament, but we're in the new covenant now. And so I think we need to stop before we start assigning meaning to, natural disasters and stuff like that, because we live under grace. If Jesus took the punishment, then that he took the punishment. So that's another thing that we didn't quite get to when it comes to living under grace versus living under the law. I'm going to stop share for just a minute so I can see in-house a little. Anybody have any questions or spin-off comments at this point with that little review from last week, or maybe things you've thought of, people at home or in-house? While I take...
Looks okay.
Okay, good. Well, I was hoping I'd get a sip of my latte here. So... All right, well, then let's go back and let's now get to the text. Let's see if there's anything else here. What's ahead? Okay, so this is where we're headed in Romans 7. So like I said, if all of that's true about the law, why was it given? What is it good for, etc.? We're going to talk about a paradox that really comes out of the Lutheran note in the choir. Simul ustis et peccator in Latin. Same time saint, same time sinner. That's a paradox. How can you be both? Well, that's what we think is the reality. Um, Paul's going to keep going though. In Roman, after Romans 6, one might think, "Well, we're done. We're free from sin. We're made righteous." Go back to chapter 3, we have peace with God. Chapter 5, chapter 6, now in baptism, we are set free from sin and we're joined to Christ. We're good. But no, Paul has to keep going and talk about some more realities. So there's more to our situation and story. And so we're going to work today with the connection between chapter 6 that we've already studied in chapter 7. Here's some interesting things that we're going to see. Paul talks about sin being destroyed, and in Romans 7, we hear about that being discharged and dominion being, what has dominion over us in chapter 6, and then 7 and following, we're going to hear about being bound to something else. Paul still has in mind how we bear fruit. And in both chapters, that's going to be a thing. And then we hear this about slavery or service, being bound to, someone and something in chapter 7 as well. And then we get this similar kind of linguistic alteration from you to we that really connects the chapters as well. So let's read and let's get into actually chapter 7. Share a different screen here, and there we go. All right. So let's get up here to verse 1, chapter 7. Do you not know, brothers and sisters, for I am speaking to those who know the law. So, okay, what that means is he's talking now to the Jewish Christians, to those in the community that are Jewish. And we know the diaspora had happened. There were all kinds of Jewish people all over the Asia Minor. We know that this is, so there were Christians in Rome that were Jewish by background. So he pauses, because the other cool thing about this little note is, remember how in chapter 3, we saw how in chapter 2, Paul's like, okay, I'm taking on the Gentiles now. And now I'm taking on the Jewish people. We all need Christ. And so he's doing a dance between, talking to Jews and Gentiles. And then now, so he stops and goes back now, hey, wait a minute, I want to speak just for a minute to those who know the law, because a lot of the Gentile Christians didn't know. Some of them did, but a lot of them didn't know anything about the Jewish, the Mosaic law. So he goes on then and says that the law is binding on a person only during that person's lifetime. Thus, a married woman is bound by the law to her husband as long as she lives. But if her husband dies, she is discharged from the law concerning the husband. So Paul's using an analogy here. That's what's going on. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law, and if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. Okay, so there's the Mosaic law. It's binding, until marriage is binding until one of the marriage partners dies. Okay. In the same way, my friends, you have died. Now, see, there's another theme with chapter 6. Didn't we hear in Romans 6 that we have died with Christ in baptism? We've been buried with him, that we might live a new life. And so we talked, just to trigger your memory here, we talked about how baptism is a death, and we compared the two, how death and baptism are same and are similar, and that some things die with baptism, but some things keep going, but then some, and we have to wait till death. So there's this connection with baptism and death, that there's an ending of things. And so now he goes back to that, and he says, you have died to the law through the body of Christ, so that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God. Now notice he doesn't say in order that we may do whatever we want and just go have this wonderful party, although I think bearing fruit for God is a party, is a joyful experience. But it's all about bearing fruit. This is not about license, and so we can be in charge of our lives without anybody else being accountable to anybody else. It's actually about bearing fruit. This whole thing we're talking about. So we don't belong anymore to the law. This is another way that Paul comes at this whole notion of being under grace versus under the law. So because there's a death that's happened. So to him has been raised from the dead in order that we may bear fruit to God. So how did we die to the law? Through the work of Christ, through the body of Christ. While we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in our members to bear fruit for death. Now, what is Paul talking about? I think you know this. The cookie jar. When I was a kid, and maybe cookies were made, maybe some really good, what are they? Oh, I love those chocolate chip ones. That's the trouble. In my household, it is baker's heaven. It's very hard. But if you put cookies in that cookie jar, and maybe I'll pass by them and I might eat one, or I won't, or I'll just not even think about it. But if mom says to me, Bill, don't eat those cookies. Now, when I walk by that jar, man, those cookies are just calling out to me. Well, that's kind of the how the law works. The law shows us the standard, but it tends to even make it worse because we're dwelling on it. So that may be what Paul's talking about. Our sinful passions are aroused by the law. So now, this sinful passions is, let's see, this is hamartia. Yeah. So I want to talk about flesh and our sinful passions. This is a place that a lot of non-Christians and Christians alike misunderstand Paul. They think Paul's anti-body, anti-physical, that all the physical is bad, whether it be our sexuality or, just everyday normal life, that's somehow, sinful or something. And it's not. When Paul uses the term flesh, and here it is sarx and not soma. The word in Greek for body is soma. So this is sarx. Paul is talking about more than just physical existence. Paul is talking about being turned inward. And so sinful passions, not passions. It's good to have passions, and whatever way we might have that. We talk in life about finding your passion, what really makes you tick, and I think that's fantastic. But our sinful passions are missing the mark passions, and is hooked in here with flesh. So when you're reading Paul, and I want you to be educated, because Paul writes, at least a third of the New Testament here. You need to know when it's the right translation, but he isn't. A lot of times we get that mixed up today, and the church has historically. So this is the turned inward side of things. Our confessions will use a different word for this flesh, for sarx. Our Lutheran confessions like to use the word concupiscence, and you hear Cupid in there. So concupiscence is, and obviously we don't use that word much anymore, but it's in your dictionary. It means to be turned inward, to see everything and everyone as to how they're going to benefit you. I mean, so that's our old turned inward nature. So while we were living in the flesh, in that reality, aroused by the law, because the law is like, wow, I can't do that, so now I want to do that. If there's a boundary, now I want to cross it. Isn't that a part of human nature? I mean, think of Adam and Eve. God gave Adam and Eve this incredible paradise, but gave them one tree that they couldn't eat from. And what did they want to do? Of course, the serpent, it's like, that's, So, but now, Paul says, so now hear this but now again. So there's old reality, but now we are discharged from the law, dead to that which held us captive, so that we are slaves not under the old written code, but under the new life of the Spirit. So again, this is a great connection to Romans 6. We are discharged from the law, not that it no longer is important, that the boundaries that it sets for us and the direction it gives to us about how to have a God and how to love our neighbor are not important. The law is still the law, but now we are discharged from it. We're set free from it in the sense that it used to hold us captive. Now we're captive to the Spirit. And again, we've been talking about this. The new life of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit in us, is that which is motivating us and driving us into the world to love and bear fruit. So that's really the first part of Romans 7 is kind of a reiteration or an expansion of Romans 6. But now is the question that you're probably all asking. Well, then what good is the law? So let me pause though. Stop the share. Anybody, you can raise your hand for Don. Anybody have a question, comment on any of that, or anybody at home, you can raise your Zoom hand.
One thing that comes to mind when we were reading that was this bearing fruit seems like an interesting way to look at things. It's more like the nature. I don't do anything for that. It's either it's in me to do this or it's not. And this accepting the grace and allowing God's nature to come out through us. I think the term bearing fruit is just kind of interesting.
Absolutely. And Jesus talks about bearing fruit a lot too, doesn't he? And John the Baptist, bear fruit worthy of repentance. Yeah, yeah. Because the fruit just happens, doesn't it? I mean, you do things to make something bear more fruit, but you don't, it flows out. So no, beautiful, Don. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, well, let's keep rolling now. Get further into this amazing chapter. Now, this is where I'll just be honest with you and upfront with you here. There is a ton of different, well, I shouldn't say controversy, but Christians have really wrestled with the second part of Romans, and I believe unnecessarily, but let's get into it. What then should we say? That the law is sin? Because at this point, you might think that. By no means. So again, you see first, should we sin that grace may increase? By no means. Don't you know you've died? Okay, so now we go, is the law sin? By no means. Yet, if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. So you see, again, Paul's going back to what is the purpose of the law? And even though in our Lutheran tradition we've had 2 and maybe 3 functions of the law, and unfortunately they were numbered, so we think one is more important than the other. But traditionally we've said the law is a guide. It shows us what it is to have a God and neighbor. And then second, it shows us our sin. Well, I think when I read Paul, the biggest function of the law, the first function, is to drive us to Christ, to knock us off our pedestal of self-righteousness that we think we're fine on our own. And it still does show us, what it is to have a God and to love our neighbor for sure. So, but if we didn't have the law, we wouldn't know sin. I would have not known that what it is to covet if the law had said, you shall not covet. There's the cookie jar thing. But sin, seizing opportunity, okay, so this is sin. Now, and let me just pause here too. Notice how Paul's using the term sin. It's like a principality. It's a power that's in us. Remember how we talked about human nature? And we wrestled with how important it is, how you define human nature is, and what our problem is. Well, so Paul says this turned inwardness, sin, seizing opportunity in the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. Apart from the law, sin lies dead. I once was alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came in, sin revived and I died. And the very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me. Now, this is really interesting, isn't it? That the law is about life, but it actually ends up proving death for us. Here's a great example of what Paul's saying. I don't know if you remember that moment in the Old Testament where the people, after wandering in the wilderness for 40 years because they didn't believe God's promise, and they are ready to enter the promised land, and Moses has handed over the reins to Joshua, because remember, Moses, who led the people out and did all of that, but he messed up, and so he didn't get to go in the promised land, which I've taught on many times and said that's because the law doesn't get you in the promised land. That's why Moses didn't go. Even he couldn't do it. And so when God brings the people into the promised land, you'll note that he doesn't say, because now this new generation, they're much better than the old, I'm going to let you guys in. No, he says, because of his promise and his grace, you're going to get to go into the land. But they are still living under the Mosaic law. They have that promise to Abraham and Sarah, but they also have the Mosaic law. And so Joshua, preaches to them, and, they're going to do all the law. And he says, choose the law and you'll have life. Choose sin and you will have death. And the people say, we will do it. We choose. Remember that he says, choose this day whom you shall serve, life or death. And the people just cry out, we're going to choose life. We're going to do it. And then they go into the promised land and you think, everything's good. But no, because what happens? Sin. Apart from, but comes in and proves to be death for the people. For sin, seizing the opportunity in the commandment, choose this day who you shall serve, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, and just and good. So it's not the law is not the problem, it's sin that's in us working with the law, how the two of those work together. So now Paul, you can see his thoughtful working through of the question here. Did what is good then bring death to me? By no means. It was sin working death in me through what is good. Law is good, sin is bad, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure. So the commandment now even, brings things to a point, brings things to more clarity, you might even say. And again, that we see our need for God's mercy here. So it isn't the law that's bad, it was sin. And that's what's going on. And now Paul's going to get to this part that's people really wrestle with, the inner conflict. Let me stop real quick. Look out there. Everybody good? Yeah. Questions, comments? Okay.
So far.
All right. Let's keep rolling. All right. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold into slavery under sin. So we know that the law is spiritual, but I am in the flesh, of the flesh. And again, it's not just about soma and body. It's about, I've got this turned into nature, sold into slavery under sin, or sold under sin. And then Paul says some amazing words. I do not understand my own actions. Okay, so I am under the flesh. I do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want. I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree that the law is good. but in fact, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells within me, that is in my flesh, in that turned inwardness. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I end up doing. For now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells within me. So, what's going on here? How do we make sense of this in light of Paul saying we're now free from sin, that we've died with Christ and we have a new life and whatnot? Where's Paul going? Because he backs up now and says, I'm of the flesh. I do the thing I hate. If I do what I do not want, I agree with that the law is good. So the law is good, but it's not producing. No. Quiet. I knew that would happen. Boy, the law barks. Okay, there we go. That was perfect. Let's see now. Let me get back to my deal. So we got this tension and this dynamic. This we want to do.
Hang on 1 second.
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
Pastor Bill, I'm wondering, could you flip it back to the Bible verse?
You bet.
I'm wondering what that means. For we know that the law is spiritual. Can you explain that a little more?
I think that Paul, let's see, this is going to be, I think what he's saying here is that the law is not by nature corrupt or he's contrasting spiritual with the flesh, this turned inwardness. So the law is not, it is beyond, it has a transcendent reference. It's not simply human made up or whatnot and kind of thoroughly messed up in and of itself. I think that's what he's saying.
He's talking about God's law.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. That's an important question, Joyce, because the law here, Paul would be thinking about as the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and then certainly all those 616 laws, and probably most predominantly the 10 Commandments. Paul would be thinking about. He'd be thinking about Sinai, and so he's not talking necessarily about the human laws that we live under necessarily. Yeah. Helpful? All right. Great question. Yeah. So I want to pause and see if some others have some ideas of how to make sense of this. And doesn't this kind of isn't it true to reality? But Jessica, you want to chime in? Let me ask you to unmute there. There we go.
Sure.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm at home. Hi, Pastor Bill. Hi, everyone. So I'm a little, when Paul is talking about, he doesn't want to do the things and he does them anyway. I'm thinking about, was this before, is he reflecting before his conversion? Because we don't hear a lot about him like openly talking about his, blatant unlawful sin, the law, the law of God in the Old Testament. So is he reflecting on that and just kind of trying to give everyone something to relate to? Or is he constantly struggling with trying to be perfect?
Beautiful question, Jessica. That is exactly the question here, sorry, that is exactly the question that comes up at this point. And so many, my dog is having issues here, so I'm going to drop the,
It's a reality check.
hold on a second.
Yes.
Drop the squirrel. It's a squirrel issue. So Jessica, that's great. And so that really gets at, well, what is Paul going back to his pre-Christian time? And some Christians have tried to make sense of this in exactly that way. They have thought, excuse me, since Romans 6, how can it be that chapter 7 is true too? And so your second question, or is Paul constantly struggling for perfection? I think Paul, in my own view, is that he doesn't say, but I used to be this way. I used to, and you would think he would do that. There's a spot in Timothy where he says, I am the chief of sinners. Now, he doesn't say I used to be the chief of sinners. He says I am. So in my view, Paul says, I struggle with this. I don't do what I want to do, and I do the very thing I don't want to do, and that sin dwells within him. So, I think he's saying two things at the same time, that these are both realities in his life. Now, I don't know that he would say it's a struggle for perfection, but I think he would say that I struggle with the law and its standards and my inability to keep them. So, yeah, Jessica.
Yeah, I guess, excuse me, with what you said, I was thinking the same thing, but then the question comes in again, then is he not letting go of his past so that he can, be free of that? Is he not truly embracing the grace that God has given him? And if he isn't, that's fine, because we can see him as an example, because he struggled so much. He went through so much. He was so tormented, I guess. Can we see him as an example of maybe what not to do at times?
I think,
I don't know.
well, that's it. That's a great question. What do you all think out there?
We have two more inputs as well. So
Good. Please, let's keep going. Let's keep working. Jessica's got us going in the perfect direction here. Yep.
So about sin. So at the same time that you are yourself, you are the I, right? That they talk about here. You also can be sinning, right? So say you're telling somebody an untruth, right? You're speaking to them and you're telling them a lie. Well, while you're in the middle of telling them a lie, you're still yourself. So you have that small amount of you that is devoted at that moment to sin, or like Flip Wilson used to say, the devil made me do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have that moment where the devil made you do it and you told the lie, but it doesn't mean that you are right at that moment just a sinner. Simultaneously, you are also yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you have both natures in you at work at one time. You're walking and chewing gum.
Uh-huh. Nice. Love it. Yeah.
we have one more with Doug.
Keep going. Looks like we got another at the table too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a good time to go back to your illustration of the cookie jar, because if you think about the parent has to tell the young child what the law is, the rules. You can't just eat all the cookies out of the cookie jar. So in that sense, the parent is like God, and the law that they give is, okay, you have to, here's the things to follow. The child then, like you said, Pastor Bill, that makes you think about every time you walk by the cookie jar, you want some. Okay, so then you're, but so you have to battle with that sinful nature that's in yourself. Should I steal a cookie or not?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that maybe you've got what I'm talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Was there someone next to Kelly that was going to share a word? No. Okay.
No.
Yeah. So Jessica, you are, and all those comments are right on. Is Paul showing us an example of how not to be here? I think that what Paul's doing is telling us that we have this reality still going on while we have the reality of chapter 6 going on. You know, that, we are free. We're slaves of righteousness now. We have Christ in us. And when we present our members as slaves to righteousness for sanctification. So that's what we do. We've talked in this class about putting ourselves before the grace of God, and that transforms us. But there is another reality. So let's keep reading. With where he's going here, with your question in mind, which you were just spot on here. So this inner conflict, we're working with that. So this is what he says. So I find it to be a law here now, like a truth, that when I want to do what is good, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inmost self. So okay, so now we're talking about the self, that his being, in his inmost self. I delight in the law of God. I mean, the Christ in us delights in the law of God. But I see in my members another law at war with the law of my mind. Now, we got to pause and do a little word work with mind. Paul's use of this term, which is nous, noetic is the English word we get to talk about your intellect and your mind. Paul, though, it certainly means that. Like we talked last week about Romans 12, where we are renewed by, we present our bodies as a living sacrifice, and we renew our minds. When Paul's talking about this mind, look what he hooks it up with. His inmost self. I delight in the law of God in my inmost self, but I see in my members another law at war with the law of my mind. So when Paul talks about that, he says we have the mind of Christ. So now in the faith of our baptism, we have the mind of Christ in us. And that's what we want to nurture and whatnot. But there's another law, another force here at work that's at war with the force of his mind, making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. So I'll just in fact go over the three different, because the last part is so good here. I'll wait for that. What I want to do is stop sharing there and go to my presentation real quick. So the law and the life. Paul is talking about that we're freed from the law's condemnation and obligations. We have a new marriage partner now, and that our intuition is wrong, adding more law. And this gets at, Jessica, what you're wrestling with. That our intuition is like, hey, now that I'm a Christian, if I'm misbehaving, let's give some more law. That'll help. But it actually seems, Paul's saying, going to compound the problem. But rather, we have a new marriage partner. And so this quote about the law, the cruel taskmaster is the law, demanding brick with no straw. Remember the people when they were enslaved in Egypt, the Pharaoh made them make brick without straw to increase their struggle. Well, the law is a cruel taskmaster, demanding brick with no straw. So how do we view Romans 7? Some Christians, and I do not agree with this position, feel that Paul is not talking about himself. He's being hypothetical. He's talking about the carnal Christian. I see no evidence in the text that he's saying that. In fact, if you look at the way Paul describes his pre-Christian life, it's not negative. He actually, as a Pharisee, thinks he's without blame in Philippians here. So it just doesn't work for me that he's talking about that pre-Christian life and not his present reality. I know some Christians try and make sense of these two chapters that way. I think it's a mistake. But, I do that. I say that with humility. So I think the other way that we can look at this is it's talking about present Christian life, that we have dual realities. And this is what some of you were getting at. It says that we have, it's simultaneous, that Romans 6 and 7, and then we'll find out chapter 8, are talking about one and the same person, that simul ustis epicautor, same time saint, same time sinner. It's not either or, it's both and. And then we can talk about the ramifications of this. If I've got an old nature and a new nature that are at war with each other, that defines the Christian life. I need to nurture the new, not the old. When I submit my desires, etc., to my old nature, if I don't battle them, then I'm giving them food and I'm, helping them along. No, I want to feed the new Christ in me. But I know that as long as I live on this earth, I'm going to have both natures at war. So again, it's just going back to living under grace versus the law. Now, because I know I have an old nature, when that old nature gets the best of me, it's not like it's okay. It's not like it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. When the old nature gets the best of us, people get hurt. I get hurt. Other people get hurt. And so we battle that. But the way we battle it is to nurture the new Christ in us. We don't add more law. When you add more and more law, it just actually, according to Paul, just gets that old Adam going even more. And in two ways, this is the interesting thing, is because the old nature is not always bad on the surface. The old nature is presumptuous and self-righteous. Hey, look, I did it. I've kept all the laws. Look at me. I come to church every Sunday. I give 10%, or I give this, and I show up for that and this and that. And, I've checked the boxes. The old Adam loves that, because the old Adam can say, I did it my way. I did it. And so whether it's bad stuff or good stuff, the old Adam, that turned inward part of us, loves, in one sense, the old Adam loves the law because, as long as you keep it doable, so I can check off the boxes and say, I did it. But then the old nature also just gets revved up more, even on the negative side. So we've got that old person and we've got a new person. And I think that's what Romans 7 is getting at. I think, so you might then have the question, well, where's the hope, Pastor Bill? Where's the hope? Well, it's right here. Here we go. We'll finish off. Wretched man that I am. Again, notice he doesn't say, wretched man that I used to be. It's present tense, I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So the answer is that the rescue comes through Christ, through being connected to Christ in our baptism. And that's our rescue, not the law. It's Jesus that's the one that rescues us from this predicament. So then with my mind, remember the Christ in us, I am a slave to the law of God, but with my flesh, I am a slave to the law of sin. So you should be saying, how can it be both? It's a paradox, and Lutherans love paradox. We just find that is what scriptures tell us, that we have two laws at work in us, and we're even slaves to those two. All right, so Jessica, how did we do? Or others, what do you think? How's this helpful? How's this good news? And then we'll finish up.
We have one here.
Yep.
What's the difference between the spiritual mind and the soul?
The soul is, of course, the Greeks split up the person into soul, mind, and body. Paul is in that world, but he's more of a Jewish person, and so he sees things as more of a unified whole. The soul is the self. Some people would look at the soul as eternal and metaphysical and this type of thing. It gets complicated, Kevin, but the mind here is not just our intellect. It is Christ in us, the way Paul is using it. So he's shaping some of these concepts of mind, soul, and body. And so I think that's the difference. I think they're absolutely related because you have the mind of Christ in you and it affects your soul. And that's where the Greeks like to, partition those three apart. And biblically, from the Hebrew Jewish side, it's more of a unified whole. So I would say that the difference is that the mind here is not just our ability to think, but it actually the mind of Christ that's in us that then affects our being, ourself. That would be my best go at that. It's a huge question, great question. Good. Others, how's this helpful? Jessica, what do you think? Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you are just so right on and zeroing in on what the struggle is here, if you're still out there or available. Yeah.
I'm here. I'm just changing over to my headphones. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think so. There was a comment from someone about, and then also from you about how it's two kind of parts of ourselves fighting against each other. And I think that's making sense to me. It's helping me understand that it is kind of a constant struggle because our born nature is to sin, and that's just gonna be part of life. And like you said in the beginning, nobody said it would be easy. This is hard, and that's okay. But I think the more that I practice, nurturing that new self, the easier it will get. So yeah, this was a great day.
Perfect. Awesome, Jessica. And here, let me finish this way today because we're at the end of our time. Here's the really great way to nurture the new and put the old to death. Confession and absolution. That's the ultimate. That's why we do that each Sunday, is because the law, like a lot of Christians think, well, I gotta work on that old nature, so I need some more law. Well, first go to the cross and confess that, and that tends to put that old turned inward self to death the most. It's maybe counterintuitive, but that's certainly the way we think about it. So, well, this has been awesome.
Amen.
Thank you for, yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying amen to what you said.
Good.
That's the harder thing to do, but it's right on. Thanks.
That's great, Jessica. Thank you. Great input. All right, everybody. Well, I don't see anybody else raising hands in the in-house. Thank you for sticking around on Sunday morning and sitting in on this Bible study and for rolling with the flow here. God bless the rest of your day, and also God bless your Christmas. Hope to be back at it by Christmas here. So God's peace and grace to you.
Thank you, Bill.
You bet. We are good.